Okay guys, so in this video we are gonna walk through how to start a thread, so let's get into it. So now this is my actual Slack. So here we have our application, and basically what we've done so far now is that you can see that we have these replies sections. It's just very similar to what you see here for like the real Slack. And if I click this little button here, we'll see all of our reply messages here, and I can put more messages in here. I can just keep on kind of updating with messages, and you can see here that this number actually increments. And if we refresh here and I actually go here and I go in as another user, and well, we need to be connected on the same instance, of course. So if I do that, you'll see this, and I say something there, you see that this message actually is now being sent over correctly. So foo, bar can send back bar. Cool, so this is basically the functionality that we have to be able to just click here, click like that, and start a thread and have, yeah, replies added to our section. So let's have a look at the code for this. And there's quite a few things that we needed to do here. So first and foremost, let's look at the application. So as we can see now, we've actually added a new service because, hey, services are great, which is called a reply service, it's pretty much the same thing as just a message service with a few differences. So you can see here that we're going to get a reply, we're going to extract the user ID channel and message and the text, and then we're going to do very similar to what we do for our message service. We're simply going to create a view, and then we're going to send back over the socket the created reply, and to the channel ID we're going to send to say broadcast to anybody who is in the channel that this reply was added to. And if we have a look here, you can see here we have a reply model, a reply service, and the reply service simply takes in the message service, the user service, and the reply model. Easy peasy. We made a small update to our messages because now we actually need to store the reply messages. So that's just going to be an array of the IDs of each reply, so we can easily just grab all of the replies that we need. And here is our reply model. It's very similar to the message model, but a little bit more lightweight. And here is our reply service. We can just walk through this. It should be fairly straightforward, I hope. So we can get reply views. In other words, we can simply grab the message ID, and then we're going to grab that message, and we're going to simply grab all of the replies that are associated with that message. We're going to get all the user IDs, and then we're going to get all the users that are attached to that, and then we're simply going to construct our view or reply view by passing in all these arguments. And that's about it, really. And we can just very quickly look at that. It's very similar to the message. We have the reply, we have a user, and we have a channel ID, and we simply add these fields to our model and return it to the client, so that because we need to enrich our reply model a little bit in order to let the client make any sense of it, right? Then we have create reply view, which is the thing we saw earlier, where we basically just grab a message, and then we're going to create the reply itself, and then we add this new reply, the ID of this reply, to the reply messages array. We save the message, and then we grab the user, and then we basically construct our view and return that to the client. Easy peasy. So let's have a look at what's happened in our code on the client side of things. So if we have a look here on the action bar, we see here that I've made a few changes here. So basically we now need to, well, I added an event for just scrolling the thread to the bottom, because basically what I want to do is whenever if I do this, right, and I have a bunch of messages, and then I basically go to another thread, I want to be redirected down to the bottom. So basically that's what this does. It's just going to scroll the user down to the bottom of the thread when this action, well, that's the ID anyway. So we simply just get to a state where we want to be when you open a new thread. And then we have this thing called set selected message ID. We'll touch on that in just a moment, but basically we need to express what message, which message, the ID of the message that we have opened when we open a thread. Because as you can imagine, when I click this thread here, I want to be able to grab the messages that are associated with this message that is selected here. And a little bit of CSS classes added here. We'll just scroll through the CSS here because there's quite a few things that have changed here, but we're not going to make a deep dive into all the styling. And here is what our system, the client side now acknowledges as a reply. So I've changed the message implementation, the view model for the message, and made that into a class. And then I simply extend the message and call this reply, because a reply is simply a message, or has pretty much the exact same fields as a message, but it also has the message ID. And we can probably just make a little bit of a detour into that and look at how it used to look. So usually before it was just a function that was exported that did all of this logic and returned the shape of this object here. But now we've created a message class so that we can extend it, as I said, and basically this is the equivalent thing of what we did earlier. I moved this formatting logic to a separate helper function here, but overall this produces the same results. Great, so that's a reply and that's the action bar. So let's have a look at the thread. So the thread was earlier it was very minimalistic, because hey, we kind of just had this is a thread thing. So now we have quite a few things that has changed. So let's actually go in a little bit deeper here and have a look at all of our imports. And then we have our component itself. So this is going to be we're going to need a reducer and a and set ourselves as a subscriber for a thread basically. And here are our different events. So if somebody sets the replies, we're simply going to loop through all of the child nodes within our messages, because, well, we can look at this markup first. So we have our messages, which is just a list of messages, and then we have the edit area here, where we can basically just, we inject a text area, and then we just have kind of it's basically this section down here, this part here with the send button and all that good stuff. So that's what that does. Basically what's going to happen now is that we're going to loop through all of the messages, and then we're going to create new thread list items. We're going to append them to the messages element, and then we're going to scroll the thread down to the bottom. And that's basically what happens whenever we open a new, like this panel here. So when I close it and I open it, we are redirected to down here. Even if I scroll a little bit, I click, and we're down here again. So then we have this thing called incoming reply. As you can imagine, it's the same thing as for when we have a message. So somebody external has sent a reply to a thread that we are part of, and then this event is going to be dispatched. And as you can imagine, all it's going to do is it's just going to append that message. And the same thing goes for add reply, but this is when we do it ourselves. So when an external party sends it, that's going to fire. When we make a new reply, this is going to get fired. Here we have post message. So basically what we're going to do here is that we're going to grab the text area where we actually we're typing in things, right? And then we're going to check if there is no event code, or if there's no key code, and if there's a key code that is equal to the return key and the shift key isn't held for whatever reason. And basically what that's going to do is that we're simply going to, construct a message, and then we're going to send the reply, and we're going to empty the text area, and then we're going to reset the text area height. So basically what that lets us do is this thing here. So I can do this, and then when I finally hit enter, it's going to dispatch this and add this message. And the reason why we want to check for both if the key code isn't specified is because if I do something like this and I hit the send button instead, I still want this message to be added, and that's where this whole thing comes in, because this is for the keyboard, just making sure that if we hit enter inside of it, then that's going to fire, but if we hit the button, this is going to get fired. Cool. So let's have a look at, yeah, this. Well, hopefully this is mostly straightforward. And if we are simply hitting the return key, well, and we're holding the shift key, we're simply going to dispatch, the message add text area row. So we add a new row to our text area, and we're going to scroll the thread to bottom on every time we do that. And yeah, so if the text area length or the value is less than 1, then we're simply going to reset the text area height. That's about it, really. And we've seen this before, where if I do this, I'm expecting this to happen, but if I empty, it should reset the height back to the original height. Render message, and then we have the render function that's just going to set a child of the text area, which is our generic component for basically what I've done here is that I've moved I've created this component that represents all of the different fields for each of these sections, because we're getting to a point where we have pretty much the exact same behavior for all of these inputs. I mean, there are 3 in total now, where all these 3. And instead of copy pasting the exact same logic in 3 places, and my rule of thumb is usually if I'm getting to a point where I'm doing the same thing over and over, I mean 1 or 2 components is okay to copy paste, but if you're getting up to 3 or more, then you should break it out, and that's exactly what I did here. We're going to look closer at this component a little bit later because it's down here, but basically the idea is just that I extracted this into a separate component, and these are the input parameters that I need to give it in order for it to become a truly generic thing. So let's have a look at that later. So here's a thread list item where, well, it's just an item that is added into the list. It's fairly straightforward. It's just going to take a bunch of props and put them into our markup. And here is our init state, because hey, now we have a reducer for the thread reducer, and that's going to be hold the selected message ID and the messages, like the replies themselves. And here's some boilerplate code, just the different actions that we can dispatch for our thread, and the thread events that are connected to this boilerplate. And here is our thread reducer, which is just going to hold 2 things. It's going to be possible to set the replies so that we have all our messages and can show them in the thread. And then we have the selected message ID so that we actually know which thread are we actually on, so that we can pass that in and get the correct replies that are associated with that message. And here we've added this little routing where basically you can see here that I've just been forced to, well, it's the same code. It's just that previously you saw that we actually had a message that was just a pure, it was just a function that returned an object. But now that I changed message to a class in order to be able to extend it and create a reply, I now need to put this little new keyword in front of all my messages, or the calls to this, because now it's actually a real constructor constructing an object. Well, a real class, if you will. And here we are in the sockets channel, where I've added a few things as well. So as you can imagine, add reply, add incoming reply, and a reply model. And I will just skip through this, it's not so interesting to look at this new keyword here. But my reply, for example, is now added just as my message. And as you can see, it's pretty much the same code with a different action and a different model, but it's pretty much the same thing. And then we have a reply here where basically we do the same check as if we had a message. We're just going to check if the incoming reply is, well, if the selected channel that we are on is actually the channel ID of the reply that we sent. And if that is so, then we will simply add the incoming reply, because we don't have to dispatch it if it's not on the channel, if it's not a message for the channel that we are currently connected to. Right, and then we have the chat component, which has gone through quite a lot of changes, as we can see here. It's pretty substantial, so I've moved quite a few things, and we'll of course walk through all of this, but let's just start. So all of this logic here, save, update, message, and all this good stuff, I've basically moved all of this functionality into the chat list item. because basically what I realized now that we have this need to have basically it's very important for us to have the same instance of a chat, the list item in the chat. So in order for us to maintain that, I need to, instead of just recreating the chat list item whenever I feel like it, I need to think about if there is an importance to having the same reference to the same instance of that object. It's basically just me moving all of this stuff into the chat list item and having, well, we're gonna walk through this in just a moment, but just for now, I've just moved the logic. It's the same, it's just now hidden under a message and being handled in this component instead. And the same thing goes for cancel edit, set edit message, all of this good stuff here. And here we've changed, as I previously we had all of this create logic for our text area. As you may recall, all of this was happening inside of this component, but now that we have a separate component that represents a message text area, which is this component we're going to look at later, I've simply moved the logic that sets the height for the text area into the separate component, and now we're, instead of doing all of this updating to the height of the text area, we're actually just dispatching messages to the appropriate text area. So basically all we have to do here is that we dispatch add text area row. In other words, whenever we hold shift and hit enter and we add a new section here like this and like this, we can do it on both, and basically all we do is that we specify the name of the text area that we want, or the selector that we want to dispatch this message to. And yeah, that's about it. So adding a bit of new here, and as you can see, most of this is just abstracting away, most of the changes here is just moving the stuff that was here before over to separate components. And yeah, pretty much it's not much that has changed here. Reset text area height, open thread action. So here's one that changed a little bit, as you can see here now, because previously we were creating the thread just from scratch and just dispatching it, but now we need to actually populate it with some information. So now that the thread, this is basically what happens when we click open. So I close this, and I can close this. So when I actually hit this button here, this function is actually invoked. And so we're going to get all of the replies from the message ID, and then we're going to loop through all of these incoming replies, create client-side models for our replies. We're going to instantiate a new thread, and then we're going to create an element from this thread, and then we're going to set the replies on our state, and then we're going to set the selected message ID on the state as well, so we have access to that. And then basically it's the same thing as earlier. We open the action bar and scroll the thread to the bottom. All of this is old stuff. Nothing changed much here, and as we can see here now that previously we had the text area, as we see here, this was just an element inside of this component, but now that we moved it into a separate component, we just add a child that is named text area, and we pass in the properties that we actually want to have in our little generic component and make that a template instead. Cool, so let's look at the chat list item. There's quite a few things that changed here as well, most of it actually. So you can see here that all of our constructor has got an event handler, and we are now a subscriber, and then we have two different helper methods, show edit and hide edit. For the most part, I think we can actually do a little bit of a deep dive into this. So for the most part, all that's going to happen is that, okay, there's going to be an update to a message of some sort, and if that is the case, and the value, in other words, the action that we dispatched, which the value here is just going to be the message ID, if that is equal to the message ID that we have passed in, then we're going to fire off of all of this. We're going to grab the text area, and we're going to just update the message with a network call, and we're going to get the incoming message, grab it and put it into a message, and then we're going to dispatch set update message, and then over the socket we are just going to dispatch that, hey, we updated this message, reset the height of our text area, and then we're going to dispatch stop edit message, and then finally we're simply going to set the context, the inner HTML to the message that we have. So we can actually, you know, hey, we did actually make an update to this message, so we should see the content of that message in our text area, or the text content. And then we have a edit message handler, where very similar to this, we're just checking if it's the same ID, and then we're going to invoke show edit, which is basically, we can just very quickly look at this. All this is going to do is that it's basically going to show or hide the different elements that make up this component, because remember now that we have quite a few components working at work here. So we have our content area, and then we have like the text area, which is the actual, like this part here, this text here. And after that we have the edit text component, which is going to be hidden, of course, like unless we're editing. So if I hit this, no, actually on one of my users, if I hit edit message, you see that this little bar comes up here, and that's this component here. And then we have the replies, of course, which is this section here. So we have 3 sections that are going to be in different states. Either they're going to be all of them. They're either going to be shown or they're going to be hidden, depending on which state we are in. And that's what's happening here. So basically, we're just setting our different properties here, and the same thing goes here. I don't think we have to go too deep into that. Then let's see here, what else were we doing? Okay, so edit message. So we're going to show the edit section, and then we're going to loop through our state and just grab the message that is equal to this message ID. We're going to replace all of our BR tags with new lines, and the reason why we want to do that is because BR tags are not like in a text, these are just going to be like the value, this is just going to be the value of the text area, and if we put in a BR tag, we're going to see a BR tag and not a new line, and that's not what we want. And then we're going to get the height, like from adding this message in, and then we're going to set that area, the height of that area, of our edit text area. And then after that, we're going to grab the text area just like directly like this. And then we're going to set the value. And then we're going to focus on the text area, so that when we actually open and edit something like this, we see that we're actually at the end of this line here. Or well, we autofocus, and then we use the set selection range in order to say that, hey, I want to move the selection of my cursor from the length of the text to the length of the text. In other words, I don't want to select anything. I just want to move the cursor to the end of my list, or to the end of the text. And then we have the stop edit message handler. As we saw earlier, we could dispatch this, and it's just going to reset the height, hide the edit section. And then we're going to loop through again and get the message that we want from our state, and we're going to set the text contents inner HTML to the text of the message. And that's about it. So all of this logic that was in our chat component is now moved here, more or less. We've already looked at this. So here's our reply section, which is basically just going to be, well, it's basically just this section here. As you can see here, we have an edit text area, a setting like the chat menu, and this reply section is new, which is just that little box down here, this. So reply section, it's very similar. Well, it's fairly straightforward, I hope. We're going to be a subscriber. We're going to get the count, which is just going to be, basically we're going to go to the state, and we're going to loop through and find the message that has the message ID that we passed in, or well, the ID of the message that we passed in, and then we're just going to get the reply messages array, which is going to hold all of the reply IDs, or the IDs of all the replies that this is associated with this message, and then we're just going to set the length of that. So then we've added a lifecycle function, which is called onCreated, and I'll touch on that in just a moment. But basically, this is going to be called when after this component has been created and added into whatever parent it has. And basically, what all this is going to do is that it's going to set the display to either flex or none. Because remember, we only want to show this section if there's actually if there are any replies, right? Because this doesn't have any replies, so therefore there's no box, right? And then we have a handler for an event handler for just, well, if there's an incoming reply, and we're just going to check if this is a reply that is actually associated with the specific reply section, and then we're going to get the count, and then we're simply going to update the count. Easy peasy, right? And yeah, this is the rendered component. Nothing much here to that has some, well, we have seen this a few times before now, right? And a few minor CSS updates here. Nothing super fancy. And our chat actions have gotten a few new, we have a few new chat actions. Nothing super interesting. And here we have some new events. Same kind of just boilerplate code, right? And when it comes to adding a message, it's well, I've updated a few minor things there. So update message is now set update message, because we need to distinguish between actually triggering that we want the update to happen, or if we want to actually set the updated message, or like actually create it. So that's what's happening here. And basically all that's going to happen is that, well, in this section here we have an incoming reply, and this is pretty much the same thing as for a message, but we can go a little bit further into this one. So we're going to loop through all our messages, and we're going to map, and we are going to just check if the message ID of the action is actually equal to this message, and then we're going to add like this value to the reply messages, and then we're going to return the messages, or we're going to just return the message if it's not the message that we wanted to update or add a reply to. And that's why this is basically what's happening whenever we click something here. You can see that this number increments. Right, that's about it really. And then we have edit text, which is this section where basically we allow for, well, you can edit the text of the chat, and that's about it. Like this section here, I click this and this section here is created. So I've created this little, well, we just added the text area to this component here. That's about it really. It's not, it will, as I said, we will look a little bit closer at this, but it's nothing, well, super advanced, I hope. And then we have the message text area, which is, well, it's basically just a component, as I said earlier, that is going to hold the text area that we want to put our input into. So all we're going to do now is that we're going to give a few properties that we need to provide to our parent, like the parent nodes. And we're going to need to provide some selector, because each of these text areas, remember, we're going to have multiple instances of the same text area in this entire DOM tree. So we need to make them unique. We need to be able to express which area it is. And that's what we're doing here. We're creating the ability to create a unique selector. And then, of course, what's going to happen on key up? Well, we can pass in the on key up string, which is what you saw here. Like, all I'm going to do is that I'm just going to pass in the string that represents the function that I want to invoke on my element. And we can pass in some classes because we need to style this. And here we pass in the placeholder and the text itself that it's going to be initially added into the text area. And then everything else here is pretty much the same thing we had earlier in the chat area where, all right, somebody wants to set the text area height, all right, then we simply loop through and we create new rows for as many times as we want the height to be. And then we can reset the height. And that's basically just going to be to mutate the variable that holds the height itself, or the height value. And then we can add a new text area and, well, a new row to that text area. And creating a row is the same logic as we had before. Nothing has much changed there. And here is our boilerplate, where we just have our actions for interacting with this message area and our events. And in the globals, we've just added another variable that represents the height of the thread message height, because as you can see now, we have a message height and a edit message height and a thread message height. And these just represents these three different text areas. Chat API, so this is also fairly simple. I hopefully you can follow along. We're just going to get the replies that are associated with this message, or like this message ID, and this is the endpoint that we call, the method we invoke. And then, okay, yeah, this is just me who added a little bit of debugging. So I added the store to a store variable just to verify some stuff, but we can probably just we can actually just revert that. I don't need that anymore, actually. And then we have our message routes, which is, well, this handler here. So basically, this is the endpoint that we are going to call, and we're simply going to go and get the reply views for this message ID, and we already looked at that logic. It's just going to go to the database, construct all of the reply views, and return those. And then finally, create element has had this little function added to it. As you heard me say earlier, I added this lifecycle event to my components because I needed a way to declare that, or rather I need a handle, as you saw earlier, to declare what's going to be shown and what's going to be hidden when we actually create a component. So I want just a function that tells me, okay, the component has now been created, it's ready for you to actually set it into the state that you want. And that's all this is doing. So we're still going to run all the same create element logic, and it's just at the end, when everything is said and done, where we're going to check if we have declared this function, and then we're simply going to invoke that. And that's about it, really. Now, I know this is quite a lot of stuff to go through, and I skipped like deleting these files here, but overall this feature now pretty much works. So I think that that's us done there, and now we can have a look at adding notices for unread messages. So that's going to come up next.